My father was no longer young, even then, and I was the fifth child of his second wife. He was a short, powerful man with a snow-white beard, with kind, friendly eyes above networks of tear sacs. His hands were like the roots of an ancient olive tree, bony, thick-veined, hard with much labor, for he was himself a diligent worker among his hired men. He plowed the field with them, threshed the grain, gathered the sheaves, trod the wine, and pressed the olives, providing from his own labor all the needs of our household. But he was most diligent in his attention to the sheep. He was a great sheep breeder, having inherited this profession from his father. He had manifold uses for his animals. He sold them for meat. He supplied the markets of Jerusalem for the sacrifices. He sent his sheep to Kfar Saba and Lud, and he drew from them supplies of milk. His largest income was derived from the sale of wool. After the sheep washing and shearing, the wool was cleaned, combed, and packed in great bales. Then it was loaded on camels and sent to one of the two ports, Joppa and Caesarea, to which came the merchants of Phoenicia, who sent them on to the spinners and dyers of their country. In the cosmopolitan harbor of Caesarea, the wools of Sharon always commanded a higher price than in the Jewish harbor of Joppa. But my father did not like Caesarea. Like most Jews, he preferred Joppa for nationalist reasons. The trade of sheep breeding has been in our family for a long time, and it was said of my father that he knew every sheep in every one of his flocks. He had but to cast his eye over a flock to know what it lacked or what ailed it. He could tell whether the shepherd was observing the right hours for the watering of the sheep, whether he kept them exposed too long to the sun, whether he led them to the right pastures, or whether he had made them clamber over stony ground. He knew all the sicknesses of sheep and all the herbs which could be made into unguents for the cure of diseases. All this had come down to him from his forebears. He could read the footprints of animals and identify any marauder which had approached the fold in the night. He could read signs in the heavens and foretell by the light of the sun or moon the onset of bad weather. He would start up in the night when all were asleep, and with the energy of a young man run through the fields to his flocks, for even in his sleep he smelled the oncoming of a storm, and he wanted to be with his sheep when they needed him. In spite of his years, he would go in search of strayed sheep or kids, and would not take his rest till he had found them. It was indeed something to behold my father in the time when the animals were bringing forth their young. He would spend his nights in the field, along with the shepherds. He knew at a glance when a sheep was missing from a flock, not by counting, but by the mere sight of the flock. Night might fall while he was searching the fields for a strayed lamb, but he would not give up until the lost one had been found and restored to its mother. This devotion to the flock was part of his faith. He believed that God had put the sheep in his care, and he was responsible for their well-being. It was as if the sheep did not belong to him, but were the treasure of another man who had appointed him the guardian under the severest penalties. This was the tradition not only with my father, but with all shepherd folk. He was likewise a God-fearing man, and though not learned in the writ, he was always concerned with the thought whether he was doing God's will. He worried a great deal over the complicated laws and ritualistic regulations concerning his occupation. He once imported into our village a learned man of the city of Lud to give him full instructions concerning what was permitted and what was forbidden in planting and in the crossing of seeds, also what was prescribed with regard to the distances between the kinds of growth. He was more at ease when it came to the simple commandments of the firstlings of the flock, which had to be given to the priesthood, and the leaving of certain parts of the field after the second harvest for the use of the poor. This, too, was of the family tradition and had come down to us generation by generation. It was a great sight, too, when the priest arrived from the city of Lud. With what reverence and friendliness my father received him as he prepared for him the tithe and the firstborn kids of the flock. This was to him the essence of sanctity. But he was often reduced to embarrassment one might almost say despair, by the complicated laws of purity, the washing of the vessels, and the guarding of bread and wine from contact with non-Jews. There were, in our neighborhood, numbers of aliens, Canaanites, Greeks, and the like, dwellers on the seacoast. Our daily business brought us into thousandfold contact with them. My father was in constant terror whether, in the course of these contacts, some impurity had not been imparted to his vessels, his bread, or his wine. He was terrified lest he himself fall under the influence of these strangers, and lest his cult suffer diminution of purity or corruption by the infiltration of alien practices. His greatest fear was for our women, who in turn could be corrupters of our men. For the Jewish women were easily seduced to the worship of Ashtaroth, the goddess of fertility. Jewish women who were barren, or who conceived rarely and with difficulty, would often carry flowers and doves in secret to the altar of Ashtaroth. Nor was it a rarity to discover images and figurines of the goddess, molded of clay, in the huts of our workers, hidden there by their wives. When the priest came from Lud to collect the tithes, my father would go with him into the dwellings of the laborers, hunt out the images kept secretly by the women, and destroy them, stamping on them with their feet. Often there would ensue bitter family quarrels, and husbands whose wives had sinned in idolatry would drive them from their homes. But the women still hankered in secret after the cult of Ashtoreth, and my father trembled. He was haunted by the fear that he too might some day be tempted to the same transgression. Whenever he was in doubt concerning the interpretation of a commandment, he would send a rider to Lud. Was this or that pure? Could he use the wine which had been touched by a son of the uncircumcised? He had always envied any neighbor who had a son learned in the law, and it was his dream that a son of his own would prove worthy to be accepted in study and be given permission to interpret the law. So great was his fear of being infected with the godless ways and customs of the heathen that, in addition to the regulations and prohibitions formulated by our sages, my father had invented a number of his own. When I was a young boy, my father would take me along with him when he set out with a caravan of camels delivering wool to the harbor market of Caesarea. This city, though it lay within the borders of Israel and had been built by a Jewish king who had populated it mostly with Jews, was considered by all of us an abode of the Gentiles. And before we began the journey, my father admonished me sternly in no circumstances to take into my mouth any food of the unbelievers, no, not so much as a piece of bread the size of an olive. I can still see the great harbor city. The houses of white marble rose into floods of light from amidst the surrounding gardens. I had seen only one great city before, to wit, Jerusalem. The effect which Caesarea produced on my spirit was of a quite different order. Jerusalem had uplifted me, exalted my soul in boundless reverence and worship, but Caesarea, with its wealth, its ordered streets, its pillars and marble halls, oppressed and infuriated me. I saw in all this insolence of possession an expression of hostility toward us. Instead of the sanctuary of our God, I beheld the gigantic temple of the Emperor Caesar Augustus, towering above all the other structures of the city. Very different, too, was this harbor from the harbor of Joppa. There the boats unloaded among the rocks, which was dangerous. Here a wall, 200 paces long, was driven into the sea to break its waves and provide a shelter for the ships. And within this area, becalmed and protected, rode unnumbered boats with sails of all colors. From these colors, my father explained to me, one could tell the country whence the ships came. There were ships from Tyre and Zidon, from Egypt and the island of Cyprus. Yes, there were ships from the Greek island of Rhodes, and even from remoter points on the borders of the Great Sea. The approaches to the harbor were paved with marble, and here the merchants of many lands, in their strange costumes, assembled and chaffered round their unladen wares. We too were stationed among merchants in the wool market, where we had unloaded the bales from our camels. The buyers from Tyre, in their multicolored mantles, drew near to us. They felt and tested the wool, and then began to bargain with my father. In payment for his wares, my father received from them little sacks of Tyrian drachmas. Then slaves would lift up the bales of wool and carry them into the sailboats at the foot of the steps. When these transactions were over, my father would leave his camels in the care of the drivers, take me by the hand and lead me through the city. First we passed down a long arcade, which was made up of marble pillars and crossbeams of cedar, over which lay stretched great sheets of white woven stuff. A tumultuous crowd flowed back and forth, gathering about the booths, with their stores of dyed cloths, vessels, utensils, and furnitures of cedar wood inlaid with ebony. There were also for sale images of the gods, figures of male and female divinities, poured in Corinthian bronze or sculptured in alabaster. There were statuettes of naked women with their arms laid on their breasts or their stomachs. The buyers handled the wares, examined them, and chaffered over the price of a divinity as one chaffers over a skinful of wine or a basketful of sweet pomegranates. In the shadowy niches of the arcade lingered women who called or made signs to the male passers-by. There were also little booths, out of which came the drunken singing of sailors. My father drew me along and made me pass swiftly through this part of the city in order that I might see as little as possible of the sinfulness and impurity of the heathen, and he did not slacken his pace until he had brought me into the Jewish quarter. We came to a khan or inn. The yard was shaded over with linen coverings, and here the Jewish drivers and herdsmen who had brought wares to the city took their rest. Here we also found neighbors of ours from the Sharon Valley. The beasts of burden, freed of their loads, were brought into the yard to be watered. We untied the bundles we had brought with us from home and ate in the company of the other Jews. As we ate, I said to my father, "My Lord and Father, let me learn from you. The Gentiles serve idols and other abominations. They do not observe the laws and commandments which we observe, but follow evil according to the lust of their eyes, as we have seen today. Yet God does not punish them. He punishes only us, and he has made them masters over us." "Why this is so, my little one," answered my father, "I do not know. It is not for us to question God's ways, but to accept them in love and say, 'It is all doubtless for the best.' Thus my parents taught me. But the sages and the men of the writ look deeply into these matters. They penetrate the mysteries and seek out the meanings of the ways of God. To them the reasons are unveiled. Would you, my son, like to be of their number?" "Yes, my father. I, too, would look into the mysteries of God's ways." My father answered, "All my life long I have dreamed of a son, of a man sprung from my loins, who would be sanctified to the study of the Torah, so that my latter years might be illumined by him, and that I might be assured of the fruits of the world to come, even as I am assured of the fruits of this world. Your brothers have chosen this world as their portion, and have trained their hands to the work of their forefathers. They are breeders of sheep, but it may be God's will that my hope will be fulfilled by the youngest of my sons. What must I do, my father, to be worthy of the Torah? I have heard a word of the sages, that the Torah can be purchased only at the highest price. He that would obtain the Torah must eat dry bread, drink water by measure, and sleep on the hard earth. He must be the servant of his teacher, and stand before him as a slave stands before his lord and master. For your rabbi shall be more to you than your father. Your father begot you, but your rabbi will breathe the soul into you. That is the Torah. Are you prepared, my son, to pay this price for the Torah?" "My father, I am prepared to pay this price, and every other that is needed, if only I may seek out the ways of God." "So be it then. I will send you first to a rabbi of Lud, and in the fullness of time I shall send you also to Jerusalem." My father lifted his hands heavenward and said, "I thank thee, Father, that thou hast filled the heart of my son with the desire to seek out thy Torah."